Hello, my name is Benno van den Toren. I'm a professor here in Groningen at the Protestant Theological University in intercultural theology. And in this series on the elephant in the room, we're going to touch on one particular elephant in the room, and that is God. In fact, when we talk about God, it might not be proper to call God an elephant in the room, because an elephant in the room, in the way we talk about elephants in the room, is something that is very present. Everyone knows about it in a business meeting, in a family meeting, but we don't dare to talk about it. God is not present in that way. Our relationship with God is possibly more like a fish in the water. And then we are the fish and God is the water. The fish is not aware of the water, and yet the water sustains the fish. In fact, for the fish might not be aware of it, but the relationship with the water is one of the most important factors in the flourishing of the fish. And if the water is not okay, the relationship is not okay, the fish might die, struggle. Yet there is another image of an elephant that is often used in talking about God. You may have heard about this story that is told by an Indian king who wants to explain the different religions in his kingdom in India. There are Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, and people ask, how can these religions live together? And then the king brings in an elephant and a group of blind people. And he shows how the blind people touch the elephant, and all the blind people have different stories about the elephant. One says the elephant is like a tree because he has gripped one of the legs of the elephant. Another says, no, the elephant is like a wire because he's gripped the tail, or the elephant is like a sword because he has gripped one of the tusks, or another one says again, the elephant is like a rock because he's lying on the elephant. And the king says, this is how we relate to God. We're all blind people groping around. We just see a little bit of God. We feel a little bit of God. But we can't have the whole picture, and we should just respect each other with all these different images of God. If that is true, we might have certain pointers to God, certain inklings of God, but it might be so unclear that we might better stop looking for God effectively. If we're just blind, we might as well give up. And yet, in life, there are a number of pointers that are so strong that they are not so easily to negate. Pointers toward God, pointers that there is a God. Let me just discuss a couple of them. A first pointer I've taken from this book, a book by Anthony Flew, There Is a God. The story of Anthony Flew is actually really interesting because when I was a student in theology, thinking about God, Anthony Flew was one of the best known atheist philosophers about God. He was a philosopher who thought about religion, and he was basically debunking all sorts of arguments for the existence of God, which he said do not hold, they're not strong enough. He says, the evidence says to me that I should not believe in God. And yet, in his 80s, he starts believing in God. And just as earlier on he says, because of the evidence I can't believe in God, he says later, it is the evidence that points me to God. And in his book, he points to two particular aspects. One is the complexity of the universe. He thinks, for example, about the complexity of life as is visible in DNA. Another is what is often called the fine-tuning of the universe, or the anthropocentric nature of the universe. This is a term that is used in cosmology to point out that actually the existence of the universe, the nature of the universe in which we live, seems to be welcoming life, seems to be geared to the existence of life and to the existence of humanity. The universe is anthropocentric, centered on the human being. And that's, of course, really remarkable because the universe came into existence, possibly, probably, with a big bang billions of years ago when no human being was inside. And yet, from the very beginning, the universe was fine-tuned in a way that the existence of life was expected. Anthony Flew quotes a cosmologist, Martin Reeds, who says, any universe hospitable to life, what we might call a biophilic universe, has to be adjusted in a particular way. The prerequisites for any life of the kind we know about, long-lived stable stars, stable atoms such as carbon, oxygen and silicon, able to combine into complex molecules, etc., are sensitive to the physical laws and to the size, expansion, rate and contents of the universe. The idea is that there is actually only a minute chance, a small chance, that after the Big Bang, the type of universe comes into existence that is biophilic, that is able to sustain life. And when I say a small chance, this is a really small chance, you know, the type of chance where you need tens of zeros to explain how small the chance actually is. There need to be certain powers, certain molecules that come into existence, etc. Only then this universe can come into existence that contains life. I'm not talking about a planet simply. You know, if you could say there's a tiny chance that on this planet Earth life comes into existence, that doesn't say so much because there are more planets, there are multiple planets in this solar system, there are many solar systems, really enormous amounts, and there has been a long history through which many planets possibly went through a phase that could sustain life. But no, the chance is minute that there would ever be a universe that is able to contain a planet that, like Earth, that sustains life, that can sustain life. There are, of course, different ways to explain it. Christians might say this is a pointer to God, a God who actually created the universe in view of human life. Others might say, no, there's other explanations. One common explanation is actually what we call the theory of the multiverse. There are actually massive amounts, possibly, of universes that existed, but only one universe, in the one in which we happen to live, is actually the place where life existed. And that is where we find ourselves. And the other multiverses that do not know, the other universes in the multiverse do actually not contain any life, and no one can think about the fact that life is possible. That is, of course, a hypothesis. I would think a hypothesis that is so improbable that it might be easier to conceive of a God who created this world in view of the existence of life. There's a very strong pointer there to the existence of God. Not foolproof. You can deny it. There are also reasons to doubt the idea of a multiverse or the idea of a universe that came into existence entirely by chance and yet contains life in all its complexity. So there's one pointer, the fine-tuned universe or the anthropocentric universe. There's a second pointer that I would like to point out, and that is that many people, including myself and you maybe, have a very strong sense of morality, a sense that life needs to go in a certain way. We long for justice. We think that people should behave a certain way. You can, of course, say, that's entirely my personal choice. I want to live in a certain way. I want to give my life meaning by keeping to a certain standard, by giving every person what is his or her due, by trying to be good to others. It's my search for meaning. Yet a sense for morality is stronger than that. It's not just my personal choice, because if others misbehave, if others abuse others, think of child abuse, think of things that are terrible like genocides in Rwanda or Armenia, we say, this isn't good. We need to respect people. Human rights are not an issue of choice because you like them. Human beings have rights. Of course, in an evolutionary universe, with no God, there is no basis for such a morality. And again, there are other explanations for morality. You could say this is a mishap of evolution. We're mistaken when we think that there is right and wrong. But it could be a strong pointer to the fact that there is a God who has a purpose with this universe, and we can be wrong in relation to this God. We can be guilty, and that is what we often feel. The fact that it's not a watertight proof, neither the fine-tuned universe nor the reality of morality, is in itself not a problem. Certain things can't be proven in that way and are of uttermost value. Think, for example, of the reality of love. You can't prove that love is real. My wife can't prove to me that her love is real, yet I trust her. And if I wouldn't be able to trust her, I might miss something that is the greatest delight of my life. If I can't recognize love, and some people find it really hard to recognize true love, then we might simply miss what is most valuable in life, what makes life most meaningful. So this leaves us with a conundrum, with an enigma. There are many pointers to God, strong pointers to God, stronger than simply an inkling, yet there is no proof, no clarity. So maybe you are in the end like these blind people groping after the elephant, fumbling, not really knowing who God is. Maybe that is simply the final truth of the matter. So let's return a bit to this image of the blind people and the elephant, that according to the king explains how different religions tell something about God. There are actually a couple of problems with this story to explain how people grope after God. The first problem with the story is that the story presupposes that all the blind people are touching the elephant, that all religions, all religious people are in a certain way trying to touch God. They are touching God, which is of course not real if this is indeed the truth, that we are all blind. It could actually be that some blind people are touching the elephant, some might know more than others, but one of the blind persons is actually kneeling before the king, holds the feet of the king and says, "This is my God, you are my God." And maybe one of the blind man sits somewhere behind the elephant and he has gripped the poo of the elephant and he says, "Oh, the elephant is not like a tusk, it's not like a rope, it's not like a tree. No, the elephant is warm and smoochy and soft." But this is not the elephant, this is actually the poo. You know, the image presupposes that everyone touches the elephant, everyone who is religious. That might not be the case. That is why a number of religions like Judaism, Islam, Christianity are really worried about what they call idolatry, the idea that we might call something God that is not God, because then we fool ourselves and we're not right with God. Actually, if we're groping about God, we really need to think whether we are in touch with God or with something else. So not everyone who says he touches the elephant does indeed touch the elephant. There's actually a second problem with the image of the blind man and the elephant. And that is that the king who tells the story himself sees. He can see the blind people and he can see them touching the elephant and he sees the elephant. Often people who say everyone who is religious and says something about religion is touching something of God, like blind people the elephant, they suppose that they are seeing. They know who God is. They know what people see, partially or fully. But if we're all blind, no one can say that. If we're all blind, we need to listen, and we need even to listen to other blind people. Because maybe some of the blind people know slightly more. Maybe some of the blind people have already completely walked around the elephant, have climbed over the elephant, and have a much better idea of who the elephant is, who God is, than I am. If we're all blind, I am also blind. The king is also blind. And there is a third problem with the way we often tell this story. And that is that in the story, the elephant is completely passive. The elephant doesn't do anything, just waits to be fumbled, touched by the blind people who try to work out what the elephant is. Our family lived for many years in Africa. And actually we were able with our boys to see elephants in the wild. We're not able to touch them actually. But one day I discussed with my sons, who were then in primary school, teenagers, the story of the elephant and what it means about what we think about religions. And I asked them actually, what's wrong with the story? And one of my boys didn't actually talk about the fact that the king could see or that you might be touching the poo. He actually says, the story supposes that the elephant is passive, that the elephant doesn't do anything. But actually, maybe the elephant wants to be known. Maybe the elephant actually uses his trunk to get someone and to put him on his back or on her back. Maybe the elephant wants to be known. And that is actually what Christians say about God. God isn't passive. God doesn't just let us seek for God. God makes God's self known. This makes me think of a speech of Paul. Paul, the Apostle Paul, was one of the first followers of Jesus Christ. And at one moment he gives a speech that is described in the book of Acts in Athens, which was at the time the center of philosophy. And he says in that speech, people have always been looking for God, searching for God, grappling with the idea of God, but they were living ignorantly. They didn't know what to look for. But he says, now God has made himself known through Jesus, because Jesus is God with us. And God rose Jesus from the dead. He brought him back to life. And that is what changes the story entirely. We're not simply touching in the blind. We can see who God is because God took the initiative to make himself known. And he made himself known in a majestic way by showing his plan for humanity, by raising someone, by raising his own son from the dead. And so we know that we're not simply touching the poo or the feet of the king, but we're in touch with God's self, who wants to make himself known. If God is the elephant in the room, God is often invisible. He is more like water to the fish, more like the air we breathe. But Christians believe that God has not remained invisible. God has not remained silent. God has not remained passive. Therefore, the strong indications that God exists, and I only develop two, morality, the fine-tuning of the universe. You could actually develop many more. There's a whole tradition of reflection on arguments for the existence of God. They do not deceive us or leave us in the dark, because they are pointers to the God whom Christians believe was made known through Christ. And therefore they're an invitation which actually this whole Passion Week wants to extend to other people to seek for God and to explore whether this God can indeed be known as Christians believe in Jesus Christ. I thank you.